All right, everybody. Welcome to podcast number 2 for BioRenewable Health Network. Um, Today, we're going to talk about the history of health and look at some of the hidden truths and how we explore and reclaim our wellness through natural holistic approaches. Um, so, we're going to kind of look at a pivotal time in medicine where the current Western medicine philosophy kind of trumped over the holistic health process, which was kind of the norm at the time, and where we kind of got ourselves involved more in pharmaceuticals um, and how that dominates our system now. We're going to look at how the shift occurred, who the key players are, and more importantly, how to understand the history so we can empower ourselves today and take hold of our health. This story is one of power and money and influence. It's about a pair of brothers, the Flexner brothers. It's about Rockefeller, Carnegie. It's about the American Medical Association. It's about how media, politics are used to rewrite the narrative of health and reshape education itself, both medical and public. So buckle up because this is going to go pretty far. So, in order to understand how we got to where we are in modern medicine, particularly Western medicine, we have to go all the way back to the late 1800s, early 1900s, where the landscape for medicine was pretty diverse. There were practices that used herbal remedies and homeopathy. There was hydrotherapy. It was all very common. And medical schools around the country taught these different disciplines and kind of made it look like a patchwork across the land, much like the farms did back in the day. And then there was this famous report in 1910 known as the Flexner Report. And it was commissioned by the Carnegie Foundation and supported by John D. Rockefeller. For those of you who have gotten your sleeves rolled up about modern medicine, you all know about Rockefeller and how he influenced it. And well, now we're going to find out exactly how. The Flexner Report was written by Abraham Flexner, and what it was a report that evaluated the 161 medical schools across the U.S. and Canada. And the assessments were very stringent, and he was very consistent, and he described most of the institutions, though, as inferior or unsatisfactory, and even used the word wretched. And yes, I did look over the report. I did read a lot of the report. He did include some cities like Chicago and called them plague spots. And even some of the schools, he used the phrase, no justification for existence. So he's pretty harsh on a lot of the schools, but there were some schools practicing natural medicine that he did give a good quality report to. But the report did have the result of a significant reduction in all medical schools. In fact, when he wrote the report in 1910, there were 161, and by 1919, just 9 years later, there were 81. Basically, cut them in half. The amount of graduates from medical school were over 5,700, and that was cut to 2,600 per year. And then by 1935, there were only 66 medical schools in the US and Canada. So this consolidation favored institutions that aligned with allopathic medicine. That's the drug-based disease model of medicine. And the schools that stayed in business were the ones that ended up being significantly funded by Rockefeller and Carnegie. So, was this report really done to improve medical education, or what were the underlying motives here? Well, let's take a look at that. So we have to understand that Rockefeller, back in 1901, established the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research. This was the first institution of its kind, and it was dedicated to advancing medical science. I say that with a smile, and you could probably tell why. Simon Flexner was a prominent pathologist, and Rockefeller appointed him as the first director, and he was instrumental in steering the institute's focus towards drug-based research because that's the product that they were selling, which is oil-based pharmaceutical drugs. Rockefeller and Simon got together and realized that the best way to reform or to sell their product was to reform the medical education to align with the vision that they had. So if you can convince a doctor that the drug that they had or were selling was good, then the doctor would sell it for you without hesitation. That was one of the later Rockefellers said, own nothing and control everything. So that's basically what they're doing. Let's make the doctors sell our product for us. But they did that through education. And how did they get that done? Well, Simon had his brother, Abraham Flexner, conduct a comprehensive survey of the medical schools in North America. So he did the task effectively. And what it had him doing was acting as the enforcer of the vision by claiming that the schools were unsatisfactory. So you couldn't just show up and tell the schools that, hey, you're no good and you need to take on these textbooks and you need to promote this way of medicine. So you had to kind of do the opposite. You had to show them that what they were doing was bad and you wanted them to do better. So on the surface, the report appeared to be a call for the medical schools to want better quality. He argued that not having, or he argued that having quantity was diverting money from facilities and thus it was sacrificing their quality. So today, Abraham Flexner has been really criticized for being very racist and sexist in his report because the report had a huge impact on women in medicine and Black Americans in medicine. But he didn't specifically say that there shouldn't be women-only medical schools or Black-only medical schools. He kind of was a little more nuanced about it. Basically, his language was a little bit biased, which you have to remember this was 1910, so there was a bias towards women and there was a bias towards Black Americans. And he acknowledged that coeducational institutions were practical for women, and that in fact there were quite a few co-ed medical schools at the time. And he said that they would be better because funding separate women-only schools was a dilution of the funds, and therefore they would receive subpar facilities and a subpar education. And then he applied the same arguments to the Black population, advocating for higher standards over segregation, which, again, remember, 1910 was before civil rights and everything. So he was advocating for integration, but in the end, really, that's not really what he wanted. He was using honey, not vinegar, but he wasn't disparaging on any of their rights or even the necessity for them to become doctors. But that wasn't his mission, and he knew damn well. So the Flexner report deemed a lot of these schools subpar and then endorsed other universities. And the resulting changes that came with this was for a standardized allopathic medical education system at the sacrifice of the schools that were focused on non-drug based approaches or holistic approaches. So really, he was influencing the shape of the entire medical community simply by stating that the facilities were subpar and the money was not being spent wisely. So how did this get played out in the media? Again, Rockefeller didn't just control the research and the reporting, he's controlling the whole narrative. And through his media empire, remember, Rockefeller was the one who created the trusts with his oil company and making separate companies underneath it, which necessitated the Sherman Antitrust Act, which actually came out before he really pooled his businesses, which he did in spite of the Sherman Antitrust Act. But basically what he was going to do was create a public outcry that these unregulated medical schools and unregulated medicines are dangerous. He put out campaigns that portrayed alternative medicines as unscientific and unsafe, although they had been around for hundreds, if not thousands of years, safely taking care of people's health. Um, and he promoted the allopathic medicine as the only one with credibility because they were the only ones doing research. And what happened was the newspapers, the magazines, they were flooded with stories warning about quack doctors and poorly educated practitioners. They started medical journals that would only print articles from allopathic research facilities. And the public was told only to trust the American Medical Association accredited doctors and institutions. And if it was alternative medicine, it was dismissed as dangerous. It was unscientific. But this wasn't about promoting the truth or promoting a better quality. It was literally about eliminating competition through fear, through media. This kind of helped establish the American Medical Association as the ultimate authority on public health. But the media blitz wasn't just informative; it was literally a calculated effort to consolidate the control. So, controlling the narrative, I'm sure you guys have all seen, um, kind of still happens today. In fact, if you look deep, I've heard that the New York Post is owned by companies like BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street, which are these giant, massive conglomerate companies that own everything. These same companies hold pharmaceutical companies like Eli Lilly. And this creates a cycle where the media outlet, who we all think is independent and reputable, they publish articles and advertisements that ultimately serve their corporate ownership interests. Well, why not print an article about medicine when you own the company that manufactures and sells the medicine? So this is not about public service. This is not about news. This is about profits. And I hate to break it to you, but no media outlet is unbiased. Every source of information is attempting to influence you, including me. I'm sitting here trying to tell you some details and some facts and steer you in a way that I think is at least open to knowing where this comes from. So, just to give you a background on how these guys operate, the New York Post is like the fourth largest newspaper in America, and it's been always a tool for advancing people's agendas. So it was founded by Alexander Hamilton, and he was using it to promote Treasury policies against Thomas Jefferson's ideas. Later, it became operated and owned through other people with other interests. And they used the newspaper to promote those interests. So some of them were opponents of central banking. Some of them were founders of the NAACP. Some of them were members of the American Anti-Imperialist League. There was a VP of JP Morgan Bank. Even FDR himself was a part owner and operator. And each one of those people used the paper to sell the perception to the public that promoted their goals. That's just what it was. In fact, I remember North Jersey, where I came from, there was a construction company that bought a New York newspaper that was kind of going under, but had at least, the facilities to make a paper because, not everything was digital back then. And they turned the paper into a niche little publication for real estate agents and construction companies, which was something that wasn't available or something that was around at the time. And they got the newspaper working and profitable again. But one of the most clever moves they did for themselves was they published a monthly list of the top construction companies in the Northeast. Now, again, this is a real estate newspaper marketed to real estate agents. They would not suspect that the top construction companies, monthly list that said it was, because of research, was a fraud. It literally was advertisement and publicity, not only for the people who bought the paper, their construction company, but also all their friends. They sold off the top spots and pretended like this was unbiased, research and surveys. And they were smart enough never to put themselves at number one. They were always like number four or number five. So again, if you went back and found out that they owned the newspaper but didn't put themselves as number one, you'd probably think, oh man, maybe it's legit, but it's not. You guys could probably even remember, I don't remember exactly the year, but mid 2000s, maybe 2010s, probably before COVID, but not by much. Um, Mylan Pharmaceuticals um, raised the price of EpiPens by something like 600% over a decade. And they raised their executive salaries to match. And how did they do this? So they didn't do it through newspapers, but they lobbied their local politicians and their federal politicians to convince them to pass laws that would require schools to stock EpiPens and give EpiPens to people without possibly a necessary medical condition to need them. They package the pens in pairs so as to sell an extra one every time and jack up the price that way. And so their goal was not public health, it was profit. But one of the ways that they used information was to lobby Congress. So lawmakers aren't always experts in the fields that they're doing their lawmaking for. I mean, most lawmakers are not experts in healthcare. So what they rely on is just information that they're told either by the lobbyists or by biased sources or by the newspapers, which we know are owned by the companies that own the pharmaceutical companies. So every year, this narrative goes to new heights and the public becomes more skeptical with every sales pitch. So we see the hand that's being played out now in the research world. Harvard was one of the first universities to launch what's known as open access to their research journals, which makes it free to the public. And that looks really great, right? Yeah, but guess what? Those journal articles were already funded by taxpayer dollars through grants. And then those institutions charged you a hefty fee to buy the journal to get the answer later. And that went on for decades. And now that it's becoming known that this research has already been paid for and you're charging for the answers, um, all the major universities are now open access. So only when they had the fear of bad publicity and legal challenges did they open up the access. But they sure as hell didn't refund all the students and professionals who paid fees for those journals over the year. And so medical research isn't even immune to this play for producing information and steering the narrative to what you want. And again, it's always done with some sort of display of deception and we're not falling victim to this stuff anymore. You know, if you aren't sure if the message you're being sent is legit for your benefit, do what the police always do when they're looking for criminals. Follow the money. The money flowed to these universities. They did their research. They guided where the research went. Then they charged you for the answers, and they got rich in the process. So you have to learn how to look for it. I'm not saying that the information's bad. Much of the research that comes out of universities is good. However, there is a bias to it. So just know that there is one. So thinking of bias, let's talk about the American Medical Association and how this is part of Rockefeller's plan to take control of an entire industry that his business, which was oil, really didn't have anything to do with. So the AMA was founded in 1847, and it was created as a union to protect the occupations of doctors, but its claim was to raise the standard of medicine. You get that? It was a union to protect the doctors' jobs. Then they say it's to raise the medical standard because that sounds good. And by the early 1900s, it basically became the gatekeeper for the medical profession. And it did that through Rockefeller's financial backing. And influence over Congress. Basically, they asked Congress to pass laws making the AMA the exclusive authorized agency to license all doctors and accredit medical schools. They legislatively succeeded in positioning the AMA as the only gatekeeper of medicine in the country. They're the ones that give out licenses. They're the ones that accredit the schools. So guess what? You just marginalized or eliminated all non-allopathic medicine. And by 1912, the huge support for the AMA, or the huge financial support through the AMA to political donations, influenced Congress to recognize them. No one outside of the AMA was capable of determining who could practice medicine. That's it. It's over. Congress wrote it. And that continued even into today, through political parties and funding candidates. And that leverage ensures that the AMA's interests are always protected through Congress. Basically, they've created themselves into a monopoly, which is something that Rockefeller knows all about. He sidestepped the Sherman Antitrust Act with his oil companies, and he's doing it now with medicine in the early 1900s. So, what are we looking at? We're looking at a medical industry that by 1912, 1920, was purely allopathic. The medical schools were teaching it. The businesses that were not allopathic were labeled quackery. And although the Flexner report didn't specifically deny any of the effectiveness of any of these quack medicines or alternative medicines, nor bash some of the long-standing colleges and facilities, nobody was being funded unless they were supported by the AMA. So once you shift funding, and once you shift law, and once you shift the right to dictate what schools exist into one organization, you eventually eliminate the competition. So now all the schools, all the hospitals, all the facilities, they're all agreeing to whatever Rockefeller's research institute says, because they're the only ones throwing money. They're the only ones that allow you to build facilities and have supplies and run hospitals. So any non-allopathic doctor pretty much was threatened. They were threatened with their licenses. They were threatened physically. They had their facilities raided. Financial support was given to opposing candidates for any Congress people who, supported alternative medicines. One of the best examples is a gentleman by the name of Harry Hoxsey. He had one of the largest cancer institutes. I believe he was based out of Texas. He had his facilities raided. His treatments were condemned. His character was attacked. He was arrested over 190 times. And almost all of them were acquitted because he wasn't doing anything wrong. It just went against what the AMA wanted. In fact, he took it the next step and played offense, because if you only play defense, the best possible score is 0-0. So he played offense. In playing offense, he sued the AMA for slander and libel. And guess what? He won. In fact, the leader of the AMA, whose last name was Fishbein, had to actually admit on the record that Hoxsey's treatment worked. But if you go on Wikipedia today and look up Hoxsey, Hoxsey, you will find statements that say that all the cancer institutes, the FDA, the National Cancer Institute, American Cancer Society, MD Anderson, Sloan Kettering, they all have found no evidence that his therapy is an effective treatment for cancer. However, You can still get it here in the United States, and you can get it in Mexico. But they're not allowed to make any claims for effectiveness. You hear that? The AMA was sued and had to admit that his treatments worked way back. But they can't admit to it now. That doesn't even make any sense. So back then, everybody stopped supporting him because they feared being arrested so many times. But the actual sheriff who arrested him over 100 times actually became his lawyer when Hoxie cured the sheriff's brother's cancer. They tried to squash him with newspaper articles and sent writers down to report on his quackery and his facilities. And most of the writers who went down and saw what he was doing became publicists for him because they realized it was the truth. Another bad case was Royal Raymond Rife. He created a frequency machine that helps to cause cancer cells to spontaneously burst and die without any harm to surrounding human cells. The reason he was able to do this was he actually worked for an optics company and made a microscope capable of 60,000 times magnification. So he literally was able to see cancer. And he saw that it was often caused by a virus. And by applying sound waves at different frequencies, he could actually see that the cells, the viruses were bursting without harming the surrounding cells. It was touted as a cure for cancer with great success, working on people who were thought to be helpless and hopeless based on allopathic doctor diagnoses. And his offices were raided. His character was assassinated. You can't even look and find his devices now because they're so hard to pick up because they won't even allow you to make them. But what was more important is if you go back and you look at these two doctors early on, when they first discovered Hoxie's concoctions, Rife's machine, both of them caught the attention of the AMA, and the AMA offered both of them to buy their devices and their concoctions. And both of them told the AMA to take a hike. Mostly because the AMA wanted total control, take over the company, take over the treatment, and if they decide that it's worthwhile, then they would continue to sell it. So both men said that that's ridiculous. No. So what did they do? They went after him. They went to threaten their money. They went to threaten their facilities. They had their files stolen and destroyed. They even harassed their patients. So even patients became scared to even go see them because they were being harassed by the AMA. I mean, that sounds like Jimmy Hoffa union kind of crap that is not allowed. But they did it. Rife eventually became broke. Hoxie's clinics all got shut down, even though he sued the AMA successfully. So they're just too powerful. In fact, they even went after a senator from Oklahoma, Senator Thomas, who was friendly with Hoxie and had publicized for him, and he lost his seat as a senator in 1950. He had won Congress for a few years, then went to the Senate and was a senator from 1926 to 1944, and then all of a sudden he lost in the primary to another guy. You don't lose a seat that you've maintained for what is it, five rounds as a senator. That's 30 years almost as a congressman and senator. You don't lose that popularity unless someone's going out for you. So that's what happens when the AMA doesn't like what you're doing. And that's what happens when someone powerful with money like Rockefeller can fund the AMA. He can fund the lobbying to Congress. They can fund political oppositions. They can fund the schools. They can fund the research. And again, the AMA is the face of the influence, not Rockefeller. So he hides behind that notion of have nothing and control everything. But in the end, it helps them to sell their products. So you have to think about it. Like when Congress is lobbying or being lobbied by a medical association or any organization, how good are their policies with regards to the public. This is something that we're all aware of these days, and it's a bother. In fact, Rockefeller passed on his concept of influence, and his grandson Nelson Rockefeller took that idea to just regular influence of education. Um, he went to Eisenhower's administration. He went in with concepts of efficiency and effectiveness for health and education and welfare. In fact, that Eisenhower's administration created the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare and put Nelson Rockefeller as the undersecretary for this new department. And they sold the idea on the concept of if a child moves from Chicago to New York or California or wherever, the school system needs to be standardized so that this child could just slip into any local school system without any hiccups. This meant that the government would now be controlling and influencing the entire nation on their education. It was a play right out of Rockefeller's book of let's write the standards. Let's tell everybody it's to make everything equivalent. Let's tell everybody that this is what it's for. In fact, they sent out a woman to give the speeches to the school districts who everybody loved. She was a known teacher. I don't know her name off the top of my head. But when it came back and she convinced most of the school districts that this was a good idea, Nelson Rockefeller said, great. Now we have control of regular education. So we could set things up long before they even get to medical school that this is the best medicine for you. This is the best education for you. And for those of you who want to understand like what kind of control this is, so Nelson Rockefeller actually became the vice president under Gerald Ford. So let me tell you this little tidbit. Gerald Ford was never elected president, and he was never elected vice president, yet he held both positions. So he was put into the position as vice president under Nixon because they made it so that Nixon's vice president, Spiro Agnew, was being sought after for tax issues. So he resigned, and they handpicked Gerald Ford to go in his place. Then the following year, when Nixon ran for president, the big Watergate scandal, which again, if you love conspiracies, look it up. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. But either way, he's out, and Gerald Ford rises to president. So Gerald Ford, as he rises to president, gets Nelson Rockefeller named as his vice president. So both Ford and Rockefeller were never elected. They never went through primaries. They never were voted on. Yet both of them represented the entire country. Talk about power. Own nothing and control everything. That's what you got. So basically what you're looking at with shaping the education system is you're looking at control. So if you're controlling narratives, if you're controlling education, you're influencing the entire world, or at least our country, what to think. How much of our current education system is under attack? I mean, how many people are doing homeschool now? Obviously, we know there's a problem with it, but the reason we have a problem with it is because of people like this who take control but sell it to you under a different reason. So what we have to think is we have to think about health itself. Before the Flexner Report, before the Rockefeller funded medical schools and research, medicine was focused on promoting health, well-being. Doctors work to optimize your body, natural healing abilities through nutrition, lifestyle, natural remedies. When the goal was prevention to keep you healthy. That's what we're all talking about now. But the Flexner Report obviously restructured medical education, the AMA, to give them licensing and accreditation. So the focus shifted away from promoting health and pivoted towards managing sickness. The new emphasis is going to be on diagnosing and treating diseases, most of the time through pharmaceuticals. But we should be focused on preventing illness in the first place. So what we want to look at now is, what can we do? Well, history matters because those effects stay with us. Our healthcare system is largely reactive now, steps in when you're already sick and tries to pull you back out of it. Anybody who understands it, and out of control skier knows that you try to put the brakes on at the top of the mountain, not the bottom. Um, and don't get me wrong, modern medicine has made some unbelievable advancements. Pharmaceuticals as well have done amazing. Um, Hospitals, surgeries, these things have all done a great job at prolonging our life and improving our quality of life. But a pharmaceutical centered approach to medicine overlooks holistic practices that focus on maintaining wellness. Um, when health is our goal, we invest in prevention, things like nutrition, exercise, mindfulness. But when sickness is the focus, we invest in treatments, which are surgeries and symptom management. And both have their place, but we need to balance them. So that's what this whole network is about, the BioRenewable Health Network. We want to restore that balance. We want to advocate for a return to practices that are going to optimize your health and prioritize your well-being, and showing you the resources and support for the natural and holistic approaches. So this isn't about rejecting modern medicine. Don't ever put those words in my mouth. I use it all the time. In fact, I'm a physical therapist because I was always broken as a kid, but no one gave me the right answers on how to heal completely or how not to hurt myself in the first place. So what we want to do is we just want to expand the options and reclaim the full spectrum of care. Let's make well care, and sick care, and use the systems the way they're best set up. So you have to also remember that a healthcare system that's driven by profits will always favor the sickness over the health. And that's because a healthy population doesn't spend any money other than on food and exercise. Those aren't health industry or sick industry facilities. So, as communities, as individuals, we have to demand that we prioritize our health. Cannot allow the negative image to continue that we are alternative. We are not. Transforming this mindset from negative thoughts by a biased media and the research communities, it's going to make the physical changes seem impossible. But we can do that. What steps can we take to shift our focus from sickness to health? Small changes. Let's improve diet. Let's incorporate natural remedies. Let's seek preventative care. Now that you can do that, you can start to reclaim your well-being. And let's also think about how we can put that information into the world and into the media to help balance out the narrative, that alternative, which I always put that in quotes because I hate the word alternative. It's not a lesser health industry. It's not less respected. It's not less effective than allopathic medicine. But we have to overcome centuries of bias and profit and greed. You can't just play defense. We have to play offense and score some points. So this is what I ask. Take a look at biorenewablehealth.org. Take a look at our podcasts. Join our network if you're an alternative business. Certainly share these episodes with your friends, with your family, because grassroots efforts do last. They make a difference. We're not looking to change the entire industry overnight. If it changes, great. But really, we don't need to change it. We need to stand side by side with it. So grassroots efforts are going to be the best. So remember, health is within your power, and we need to protect it. We need to renew it. We need to live it, and we need to share it. So get out there and share it with everyone. And we'll see you for the next episode soon.